don't stress, Quadrant Singum says. The aim of a research problem, my dear Hogan, is not to discover new facts. We already know that the German army is superior. Here we are merely furnishing scientific proof. The aim of cheating is not necessarily to win. We already know we're going to win. We're just hastening the inevitable. The aim of election fraud is not to win an election. We already know that the Democrats are going to win. Here we are merely hastening the final victory. Ideas don't change. And chances are, if somebody said something and you agree with what they said, but you didn't like the way they said it, they probably said it exactly the way you needed to hear it. I'm Arian Archive, and this is Chaos Theory. So, where we're picking up is I wanted to drill back down into two things. First, something I don't think I really got into in response to now Dr. Steve Turley and Liberal Hive Mind, and that is the war in Ukraine. Now, Dr. Dr. Steve Turley, I think I got that right, is seems to be very well convinced that the United States or allies of the United States were responsible for severing the Nord Stream 2 pipeline. I'm not so sure on that. And the immediate reason why I'm not so sure goes into one of the things where I don't disagree with the liberal hive mind, but I'm not entirely sure that the liberal hive mind was entirely on point in the conflict between Russia and Ukraine. For starters, both Russia and China were some of the major funders of the acquisition of graphics processors used for digital currency calculations. Both Russia and China were using the GPU capabilities to retain calculatory control of digital currencies. In other words, the calculations made to perform the digital currency calculations were being done on Russian or Chinese national soil. Now, that's important because once you understand where the calculations are being performed and who actually has control over the hardware that is performing those calculations, you gain calculatory control. If you are the one making the calculations, you can examine those calculations and use the metadata from those calculations to unmask and identify who made the financial transfers. Owning the hardware platform that actually does the calculatory control of a digital currency transfer means you can unmask, know who made that transfer. The Chinese government, we know for a fact, used their control over digital currencies to unmask dissidents in China and execute them. We do have evidence, but we haven't proven it to the extent of where it would be court admissible, that Russia tried to do the same thing. Now, Russia failed. Russia never managed to get as much of a foothold in calculatory control as mainland China. Now, this really comes down to energy costs and why we saw both Russia and China run out of energy. China literally going hat in hand to other countries to buy coal and to buy resources in order to keep the Chinese power grid going. Likewise, Russia ran out of power to drive the digital currencies. Now, that's a significant aspect of the war, of the invasion into Ukraine, and it's one that cannot be dismissed. Russia did not have the power resources to continue to drive their own power consumption, much less the power resources of other countries. This is why I'm not so sure that the United States was responsible for destroying the Nord Stream pipeline. Russia has the motive. They don't have the oil, the coal, the nuclear power resources. They don't have the resources to power their own country. That's one of the reasons that that Putin went ahead with the Ukrainian invasion is he needs Ukrainian resources. Without Ukrainian resources, Russia nationals suffer. Russia nationals have no power. Russia nationals have no access to food. Yeah, that's the kind of thing that sends people into an uproar and gets governments toppled. So, the claim that the United States destroyed the Nord Stream pipeline, yes, there is evidence to suggest that that probably could have been the case. But we're also counting on the U.S. administration, the Biden administration, to A, be capable of retaining a secret, B, be capable of issuing an order to a foreign power or to get foreign ally help for such an operation without it leaking, and C, show any kind of competency at all in dealing with foreign allies. To date, the Biden administration has not displayed any evidence of the above three conditions. I reject the idea that the United States was responsible for the destruction of the Nord Stream pipeline simply because I don't think the Biden administration is competent enough to pull that off without it leaking, without people talking about it, without it being known. I can completely accept that the Russian government is capable of severing the Nord Stream pipeline, blaming the United States, and getting away with it because Putin, for everything you can say about him, he is not incompetent. He is not an idiot. He is not a blithering fool. He doesn't say things he doesn't really believe in. He may be a tyrant, but he's not stupid. And that's an important distinction to make here. And that's where I don't disagree with the liberals warmongering in Ukraine. I don't disagree that there are other factors to consider on the side of Putin's Russia. I don't disagree that, well, maybe Putin was provoked into making an attack. Yes, there are political nuances here, but the energy consumption and how Putin chose to run his government and run his resource allocation is an unavoidable factor in this. And the fact that continuing to run the Nord Stream pipeline would put additional pressure on Russia itself is not one that can be so easily dismissed. All right. So now I wanted to come back and kind of look at, well, energy acquisition. Obviously, here in Cyberpunk, I'm overlooking a solar panel farm. So let's go ahead and just drive on down there. Oh, and this is going to be interesting. And of course, I roll the car. Oh well, looks like I gotta hoof it. Oh, that went swimmingly well. Let's try this again. Yeah, I wonder what it says about the physics engine that I can pull that kind of stunt off. Or more, probably the more salient question, how many times have I done that? All right. Part of the reason why I'm driving over here is I want to give an emphasis on the scale of the solar power plant in this game. And I want you to keep in mind that the speeds here are relatively realistic. However fast it says I'm going is however fast I'm actually going in game. So keep in mind how long it is taking me to drive across the solar field. By scale, how large these solar fields are. And we'll drive across this one as well. So if you're watching by the frame rates or by the timestamps. You see the size of the car, you've seen the size of the person, so you've got an idea for scale for just how large these plants are. Oh, hey, an access road. Oh, hey, something trying to kill me. Alright, so this is our third solar power plant. Now I can, now that we've got an idea on size and scale, I'll turn around and make the point that I want to make. How much power do these solar panels generate on a per square foot basis? As in, for their size, for their allocation, how effective are these solar panels? And you might be, running some calculations in your head. Well, the average size of the solar panel is this, the average power throughput is this, the average something, something, something is this and this and this. And to be perfectly blunt, all of those calculations are effectively, well, meaningless. Because no matter how you run the calculations, no matter what percentage of energy per square foot that you come up with, there's the fact that this is a huge amount of landscape with nothing else underneath them. No houses, no farmland, no factories, no businesses, just land. Land that is being taken up for nothing else than holding up a solar power panel. All right. And so that's a kind of first thing to keep in mind, that solar power takes up a lot of space. The square foot per power generation, that is to say, how much power you get out of a square foot of a solar panel versus other energy methods, is very, very low. Now, I'm not going to go into exactly how low, because it's not really an important factor to consider. It's just you need to know that it is low. How much lower doesn't matter, because, well, it's lower. Doesn't matter if it's 50% lower, 25% lower, 15% lower, or 100% lower, or 1,000% lower than other energy generation stations that could be put into that particular floor, into that amount of land. Because, and the reason why it really doesn't matter, is that there is an Achilles heel to solar panels. Solar panels have a finite lifespan. There are only so many times that a solar panel can be used. Once it hits the end of its lifetime, once the solar panel stops being able to generate electricity, it has to be replaced. It no longer is useful. Okay? So, next question that you have to ask is, we know that this is a lower power per square foot compared to other energy sources yet to be named. We know that we do have to replace the panels. We know that there is a certain amount of construction cost for these panels. So the question is, what happens when we replace the panels? What do we do with the old panel? Again, most people kind of tilt their head and go, yeah, but throw it away. Well, that's the thing. You can't actually throw a solar panel away. Solar panels are incredibly toxic. That is to say, they are poisonous. They poison well springs of water. They make it difficult, if not impossible, for crops to grow in lands where toxic panels have been placed. So they effectively become an anti-ecological bomb when thrown away. You can't throw away a solar panel just anywhere. You have to dispose of it in almost the same kind of circumstances where you would dispose of nuclear waste. Otherwise, it will cause long-term damage. Solar panels are not biodegradable, and there's no easy way to make them less dangerous to the ecological conditions of wherever a solar panel is at. Thus, from a long-term perspective, solar panels are more dangerous, are more deadly to the ecology, to the actual ecological cycle, than other forms of power generation. Now, I'm pretty sure that there are some wind turbines, but I may be on the wrong side of the city to see them. So I'll kind of quickly cover the problem with wind turbines is twofold. First of all, they require a lot of space. Like solar panels, you need a wide, open, empty area where wind actually blows. Now, if you are in a very windy place, if you are on top of a jet stream, if you've got a constant sea breeze, wind turbines are an effective means of generating power. They're also an effective means of devastating local flora and fauna. And if you're looking, going, what? Wind turbines generate low frequency emissions. That is to say, they generate a low frequency sound from the motion of the blades moving through the air that is destructive to uh, plant life, is destructive to fauna, that is to say, birds, which, if you go to an actual wind farm in position, if you go to the bottom of the bases, you will probably find a number of dead birds, and you will probably find a number of dead birds out along the perimeter of where the blades actually operate. All right, and then if you want to get more disturbing, you'll find that the birds that have nested in the area will likely be disturbed. They will be anxious, they will be chirping, they will be twittering, something will seem off in their behavior. So, once again, wind turbines sound like a good idea, turn out to be actually not a good idea. Hydroelectric generation. Now, there's an idea using gravity and water. There is a natural cycle of rain, there is a natural cycle of rainfall. So, obviously, if you take the correct steps, you dig the right trenches, you dig the right canals, you dig the right waterways, you flood the right valleys, you build the right dams, you can use the natural progression of waterfall in order to sustain a long-term energy electrical generation. Hydroelectric power is not a bad form of electrical generation. However, it does require a significant amount of pre-planning. You just don't shove a dam into the ground, block some water, and have instant power. I think I'm heading to where I remember a wind turbine maybe being. But I'm not sure if I can actually go. No. Yeah, that went about as well as I didn't expect it to. I'm pretty sure on the other side of that exit is the Nomad starting area, and I remember there being a tower out there when I was on when I ran Nomad. And I think maybe there was a wind turbine on the other side of it. But obviously, I can't go out there quite yet, if at all. All right, so I'm trying to think if there was any other places where wind turbines may have been, so I could just go pick on one in person. Um, but I'm not. I'm just drawing a blank on that. All right. So, anyways, hydroelectric generation is actually a fairly decent, long-term, sustainable amount of power generation. You just have to prepare for it very far in advance. You're going to have a significant lead time. This is a bootstrap time before you have your power generation on a reliable basis. All right. And then we have a tidal power where you use the power of the tides to generate electricity. Now, tidal power is one of those, yeah, is not as effective as gravity-fed hydroelectric power, doesn't necessarily need to prep time, bootstrap time in order to configure to generate power, but the power on return of trying to use that was weird. Of trying to use tidal power doesn't always work. Geothermal power is another, actually almost acceptable form of power generation. All you need is a sufficiently hot geothermal source and a plant that can use that geothermal energy to drive a water cycle. Once you have a water cycle driven, then you can use steam power in order to drive turbines and still generate electrical power using a geothermal source. Second, I'm on microphone. No, I'm not doing as well as I could be. All right. So geothermal power actually starts to take us back to the most efficient, most carbon neutral, most energy efficient per square foot energy solution, and that is nuclear power. A nuclear power plant can deliver more electrical energy per square foot than any other known power source. A nuclear power plant is more efficient than a hydroelectric dam. Now, interestingly, this hydroelectric dam is completely shut down and inoperable, even though it could, theoretically, be turned back on and generate power for the city. But it can't be for, this is, move. We'll climb the hill back up and we'll look at the other side of that dam in a second. All right, so, and this has basically been a long-winded way of going, where does your power come from? For most people, they really don't realize that their electrical power is probably not generated by a hydroelectric dam. It's definitely not generated by a solar panel farm. It's definitely not generated by a geothermal plant. And it's definitely not generated by wind turbines. And the power grid is definitely not generated by using tidal power plants. Rather, in most cases, across most of the world, there's only two kinds of power plants that reliably generate the electricity that is used to power the average nation. You either have a nuclear power plant or you've got a coal-fired power plant. And that's it. That was an interesting explosion. All right, we are at the top of this dam. And as we look over the side, we can see that the water bin back here is empty. So there was, and you can see another dam all the way over there. I'm pretty sure that's the dam we can go drive to. We can see here that Night City has one giant reservoir of water that's not even being used right now. There's not even a pathway to exit for it to be a source of power generation. And I'm pretty sure we can drive out on top of that other dam, because I'm pretty sure that's where the lake is. And I've damaged my car so much driving off-road that we're starting to lose control of it. Oh, this ought to be fun. All right, so while I'm driving over there, okay, we're actually almost impact. Yeah, now we're on top of the other dam. And now we have another view at our completely empty water reservoir that could be holding stored potential energy and isn't. And then we have a look at our other lake, which is currently burying a town, which also could be used for energy generation. But because its receptive uh, reservoir is not presently accepting water, is not being used for power generation. Interesting. So where does Night City get all of its power from? It's definitely not from the solar panels. There are not enough solar panels. Even if you assume a quantum leap in solar power generation for the sake of science fiction, there are not enough solar panels in that farm to drive that city. Now, it's implied very early on in the game and throughout the game that Arasaka is also an energy company selling nuclear power to the city, which is why Arasaka can get away with a lot of the shenanigans Arasaka gets away with. Can I go down this ladder? Let's find out. Apparently the answer says yes. What's down here? Yes, I'm heading out to the bottom of the reservoir to see if I can look at that smoke stack, whatever that was out there. I don't remember any mission in the game that actually took me down there. And yes, this is kind of inspired by Martin Zero and Paul and Rebecca Whitelock venturing into the drained reservoirs in Britain. I don't have any drained reservoirs around here to go scamper about in, much less would I let myself be caught on camera like that. But, you know, we've got this reservoir here. I don't think I've ever actually been down into it. So this is either going to end very badly. But as I make my way through oh, this is a trash pit. Okay. This is a trash pit with broken geometry. I'm now actually curious if this is the trash pit where you start the beginning of the game at. Where you get dragged out of. Oh yeah, lots of broken geometry down here. Trash just hovering in the air. Alright, so anyways. So when it comes down to it, hydroelectric power and nuclear power generation are the best ways presently we have to get environmentally, ecologically clean power. Now, you might be thinking for a second there, wait, isn't nuclear power incredibly dangerous? Yeah, not to put too fine a point on it, the United States Navy and okay, that message says that at some point there may be something in here. Interesting. What if I go around this lake? Will I get that same message? Can I look into this lake? I'm thinking this has got to be where the opening cinematic takes place. Because it's being very definitive about keeping me out of there. More broken geometry. What's that over there? Well, let's go find out, if we can. Anyways, so going back here, now that I've completely dredged on power generation, now we can have an idea of why Russia is in such dire straits. Coal power can only generate so much electricity, and Russia only has so much coal to work with. Nuclear power can generate a lot of electricity, but there is a significant bootstrap time to setting up a if this is supposed to be water, it's glossy like water. So that is an upside down car on fire. An upside down floating car on fire. Somehow I'm betting that CDPR never exactly counted on somebody grabbing a character and finding out what's at the bottom of this empty reservoir. Anyways, so Putin and Russia don't exactly have a large amount of options for energy generation. Burning petroleum for countrywide scale energy generation is generally inefficient compared to nuclear or hydroelectric power, and especially even compared to coal power. But it also has a knock-on effect. All right, we're going to see if it kicks me out of here. And if so, where does it kick me out of here back to? Yep, there we go. Kick out. Where'd you put me at? Above? Oh, that's just mean. Looks like I gotta walk all the way around out the other side. Or can I get up this hill? Maybe? Maybe not. Rock climbing for fun and profit. Oh, broken geometry. Good to know. More broken geometry. Well, at least I'm getting athletics experience for this. So it's not all lost. But I think it's safe to say I'm definitely in a spot where CDPR never exactly counted on the player going. Getting that message if I try to go that way, so it looks like I've got to go all the way back around. All right, so back to lecture time. All right, so now that we've quasi-established power generation, quasi-established that China and Russia are running out of the power sources that they have in abundance, we can begin to understand why China made some of the trade deals that it made with countries that had a substantial amount of coal to send them. We can further grasp why Russia felt compelled to go ahead and invade Ukraine. We can generalize, in theory, that the United States was probably not responsible for dismantling Nord Stream 2, as Russia had a very good motive, lack of energy, to shut it down, because Russia was very happy when they no longer had to provide Nord Stream 2 oil under contract to countries in Europe. And this is one of where I aggressively differ from the liberal hive mind. Yes, it's a tragedy. Yes, there's going to be a lot of people in Europe from countries who had dealings with Russia who were buying energy from Russia that are going to go hungry, going to go without food, going to go without shelter, who are going to be absolutely miserable, many of whom may not even survive the winter. There's just one slight flaw in this. Russia didn't have the energy to sell to begin with. Keep that in mind that, yeah, the Nord Stream 2 destruction is definitely something that shouldn't have happened, but either it was going to be destroyed or Russia was going to have to default on contracts and say, we can't meet those contractual obligations. We don't have the resources to sell. So, all of those people who are going to suffer definitively with the destroyed Nord Stream 2 pipeline were going to suffer anyways because Russia didn't have the resources. I mean, really, this is why energy independence is such a huge talking point on the political right, on the political independent side, because being reliant on your own self-generated energy sources means you are not beholden to another foreign power where something could go wrong. Countries that were heavily invested in purchasing energy from Russia were always beholden to Russia's ability to produce that energy. And quite simply, Russia hasn't had the capability to produce that energy because Russia has been spending that energy on digital currencies, on driving the power generation to retain calculatory control. Much like China, Russia did not correctly estimate the exact electrical costs and how punitive driving calculatory control would be on the power generation of the country. Quite simply, digital currencies are never going to be a thing unless there is both a quantum leap in computing power per watt and a quantum leap in electrical generation. The math simply doesn't work that way. All right. So, let's whip this back around then. Now that we kind of have an understanding of maybe what's going on at a higher level with Russia power generation, China power generation. We have a quasi outline of popular power generation techniques and why one is more valuable than the other. I wanted to go back since I kind of got sidetracked on nuclear power has not stopped development. Toshiba, Westinghouse, other nuclear power oriented companies. I'm just going to focus on those two because Westinghouse has the AP1000 reactor, which at that point is 5 or 6, 7, 8 years old. And it was certainly not the end of Westinghouse working on that reactor. Toshiba has the deep well batteries. And again, the deep well S4 is something like 10, 12 years old now. And neither of those two organizations, neither Toshiba nor Westinghouse, have stopped developing nuclear power. In fact, most power plants, excuse me, most power companies that have a nuclear facility have not stopped investing in nuclear power research, nuclear power safety, or nuclear power generation. In other words, most of the information that a casual citizen of the United States or any other country has on nuclear power may only be derived from what they learned in high school about the Chernobyl incident, the 3 Mile incident, and maybe if they were taking engineering, they may have had an overview of nuclear power generators as used in submarines. If they worked for Lockheed Martin or knew someone in Lockheed Martin, they may have had an overview of the nuclear powered airplane flown out of Georgia or attempted to fly out of Georgia and the various prototypes thereof. But for the most part, the average high level view of nuclear power is, for a lot of potential voters, is, well, ancient in technological terms, objectively ancient. They're dealing with, uh, they're basically looking at plans that would have been valid in the 1960s and 1970s. Nuclear power hasn't sat still. So, nuclear power today's Toshiba Deepwell reactors are an effective solution, are a safe solution. AP1, the Pebblebrook reactor design. Again, it's a safe implementation. There are different ways of implementing a nuclear power facility to gain the thermal reaction and then use that reaction to drive turbines, to drive power generation, to complete a closed cycle. There's better ways of handling the water now to separate the radioactive water and decrease the amount of, or to decrease the amount of fluid that is exposed to a heavy radiation for any particular period of time. In other words, the fears associated with nuclear generators are, for the most part, entirely invalid under a more modern construction, even as of 10 or 12 years ago. And again, the companies who have invested in nuclear power, who have invested in the research, they haven't sat still. They haven't been sitting there twiddling their thumbs while going, well, we made this, there's no reason for us to do anything else. That didn't happen. All right. So now we can circle around and come back to and focus on something else. Focus on something that actually, according to CNN, according to polls, actually matters uh, to the American citizen. Inflation. How far the dollar goes to buy a product. Now, again, one of the reasons why energy independence is such a huge deal on the political center, on the political right wing, on the independent minded, on the let's find a balance minded political spectrum, is that when you are not reliant on another country for power generation, you are not reliant on another country. It's self stating. Not being reliant on another country to power your PlayStation is not being reliant on another country to power your PlayStation. You are not beholden to some other entity's political, social, or economic interests. You are not beholden to another country's ecological interests. So, once you understand that you are not beholden to another country's needs, desires, whims, or even capability to produce energy, we can start to form a plan for combating inflation. Now, this is a simple series of laws. And again, we'll look at the US Constitution for an outline of how we want our law to function. We don't want extraneous text. We don't want um, loads of footnotes. We don't want tons of legalese. We want simple, clear, concise sentences that get us where we want to go. So, the rough outline of an anti-inflationary act is as follows. Step 1, immediately suspend the EPA, and I don't think it's called the Atomic Regulatory Commission anymore. Uh, Actually, let me look that up real quick. Uh, Superseding agency. Okay. Step 1, immediately suspend all operations and all personnel of the Environmental Protection Agency, the Energy Research and Development Administration, and Nuclear Regulatory Commission. Step 2, all tasks associated with these three agencies are immediately remanded into the authority of each individual state. That is to say, all states now operate independently their own EPA, ERDA, and NRC agencies. In other words, full power is returned to the states. There is no federal level control. Step 3, immediately suspend all taxes on all equipment and all labor for construction of nuclear and hydroelectric power plants. That is to say, any company that invests or is involved in the development and construction of a nuclear power plant or a hydroelectric plant or the construction of a reservoir for a hydroelectric plant immediately is given a tax. They are exempt from taxes. They are providing infrastructure development. They do not have to pay taxes on their equipment. They do not have to pay taxes on their labor. They do not have to pay any taxes. They are tax-free for the duration of the project. So not only have you now given a financial incentive for energy companies and private businesses to contract and immediately work on these programs, you've now cut the amount of money that they are having to spend in regards to buying equipment and to paying laborers to handle that, to actually perform the task. All right. Step 4. Immediately suspend all taxes on all food production labor. That is to say that if you work in the restaurant industry, that if you work as a farmer, that if you work in any sort of food supply business, your company no longer has to pay, or is for a period, tax free. You do not have to pay taxes on your labor. You do not have to pay taxes on your equipment. You do not have to pay taxes on your operation. All right, so what is all of this going to do? The first thing is it's going to give a direct incentive to get working on mass energy, effective energy infrastructure, digging reservoirs, putting up hydroelectric dams, getting nuclear power plants installed. Second, we're taking the federal level out of it. We're leaving it up to the states themselves to oversee the operations. So states that have red states, Republican states, will more than likely immediately certify nuclear power plants very quickly and will have those power plants operational probably by as early as August 2023 if this is the first step that Congress takes, that the Republican Congress takes when they enter into office on January 6th. By August, getting the federal government out of the way, the Republican states could likely already have functional operational nuclear power plants. But there's still one more step to go. And this is again Act of Congress Step 5. Immediately suspend all federal level restrictions on oil refineries. Remand control and oversight of oil refineries to the state level. And this is something the Saudi government has brought up. Yes, they could sell the United States oil for a lower price, but that would be crude oil. The United States is having to pay the Saudis to refine that oil because the United States refineries have been under assault by, if you guess Democrats, you've been paying attention. So, once we, again, get the federal government out of the way, remand it to state level control, that states have complete control over oil refineries to license, to allow access. Now we have oil refineries that can be fired back up. Now we can bring in crude oil and refine our own oil in-house rather than having to drill oil in the United States, ship it out to another country, get it refined in another country, and then have it shipped back. Now, if this is done as an act of Congress, the president cannot override it, because what can happen is Congress passes the act, they send it to the president's desk, the president vetoes it because, of course, the president, a Democrat president, is going to veto logical methods of fighting inflation and logical methods of generating energy. It gets sent back to Congress. Congress simply doesn't override. And this is something we've seen before. When there's been a lame duck president in office, Congress just sends bill after bill after bill, resolution after resolution. The president vetoes it, goes back, and Congress just passes it anyways. So now the president doesn't get any say in it. So basically, we are set up in a position, collectively speaking, on the latest polls, where the Republicans can run a power play, drop the cost of energy, drop the cost of energy generation, drop the cost that is actually costing employers to run critical businesses, that is to say energy generation and food generation, two very important factors here. And water is part of food generation. So now we're looking at water plants and water facilities that will also benefit under these very simple outlines, not a whole, no legalese here, just simple statements. And then we can see a very clear difference between Democrat governors and Republican governors, and Democrat Congresses and Republican Congresses. Again, if the foundationalist style, the MAGA style politicians jump on this, or the anti-politicians like Herschel Walker jump on this, get this pushed through and start operating on it, we could have nuclear power plants as early as August that are fully operational, fully filling in the holes on the electrical grid, and now the Republican states will have excess energy that they can then sell to Democrat states. And that's going to be an important point, because a lot of people will realize when they look at their power bill and it's gone down because the Republican state is charging less to generate their power than the Democrat state that is charging more because they don't have the energy generation capabilities. All right. So that's really where I wanted to go with this, is very rapidly, how can we attack inflation? I know some people are going, wait, how does this attack inflation? What we're doing is we're lowering the average cost to run everything. I mean, think about it. Refrigerators, air conditioners, trucks, cars, vehicles. If we attack the energy generation, very quickly establish an energy infrastructure, even if it's only in Republican states, because they're the only ones who are going to act on this. You're not going to see any Democrat action on nuclear power or hydroelectric power. You're not. I'm sorry, you're not. And if you think that you are, you're wrong. I can't explain how wrong you are, because you are dealing in a non-reality. You are expecting rational, insane behavior from a political party and political ideology that has never dealt in rational, insane behavior. That's not something I can address. That's not something I think I'm qualified to address, because now we're talking about being willfully ignorant, willfully unobservant, and you're repeatedly making mistakes that history has said, don't make this mistake. So if you're still voting Democrat after years of seeing Democrat destruction, I really don't know what to say to you. I mean, if you tell me, why are you supporting Trump? I thought you were smart. You just revealed yourself to be a complete and absolute moron. No matter what you do from that point forward, you are never going to be able to reclaim the, well, you're kind of smart, you're kind of intelligent. No, you completely blew it. It's going to be very difficult to take someone like that seriously. And yes, this was a very personal incident where someone actually looked at me and said, why are you supporting Trump? I thought you were smart. And the sheer level of, this is not just ostrich sticking your head in the sand. This is deranged behavior from a psychological perspective. This is it's quite frankly embarrassing. It's embarrassing that somebody would say something like that even after the observable evidence. I mean, are they tone deaf? Are they just unobservant? Or are they in an echo chamber? Do they legitimately not have the capability to figure out what's going on? And they legitimately don't have the capability to figure out what's going on. Why? Why aren't they researching? Why aren't they searching? Why aren't they asking questions? All right. And this wanted to bring me all the way back to the start, where the point of asking questions. If you agree with what I said, but you don't agree with the way I say it, or you didn't like the way that I said what I said, then maybe I said it exactly as the way you needed to hear it. And if you agree with me that green energy is a scam, but you don't like the way that I outlined why it's a scam, that I outlined why solar panels are a bad long-term solution, they are a toxic, ecologically destructive solution. I've outlined why wind turbines are not an ecological solution. I've outlined why hydroelectric power and geothermal power, and maybe even tidal power, could be solutions, just not at the scale, without a massive amount of infrastructure and pre-planning. Excuse me. Come on, Mike. And I've outlined why nuclear power and to some extent hydroelectric power are the best options looking forward. Nuclear power doesn't require a huge amount of boot time. You just need a land base deep enough to dig a big well for a Toshiba plant, or you need a sufficiently large area to do an AP 1000 or its successor. What are they up to now? AP 1500 maybe? Um, and in the same space where you could fit an entire solar plant, you could fit a nuclear power plant and a sulfur iodine plant for hydrogen fuel cell generation that would generate an order of magnitude more electrical power per square foot and would be have a much lower carbon footprint and would not be long-term destructive to the ecology. You're going, wait a second, aren't radioactive isotopes destructive? And okay, yeah, radioactive isotopes do have a certain half-life, but disposing of them and preventing the radiation actually isn't that difficult anymore. Uh, and once you're able to plan around the half-life of it, and this is one of the big points of modern nuclear generators, is it's extending the life of the reaction so that you get more usable thermal generation out of a radioactive product before you have to dispose of it. If you can extend the life of how long your actual product lasts, or if you can use less fissile material to make your reactor and still get the same amount of power, then you ultimately decrease the amount of long-term ecological damage. And again, we've had lots of experience in disposing of and figuring out how to decontaminate nuclear residue. Is not exactly something that scientists have been sitting around twiddling their thumbs going like, oh, there's nothing we can do about nuclear radiation. No, it is an addressable problem. There has been work on it, and at this point I really don't know if I'm crossing NDA territory to talk about what can be done, so I'm going to kind of leave it at there. From an ecological standpoint, disposing of nuclear waste is less toxic per square foot than disposing of a solar panel. That may give you an idea of the quantum level of difference we're talking about here. Not just on the power generation side, how much electrical power you can generate, but in how destructive it is to the ecology after you've used up that component. Okay, so I keep getting away from if you agree with me but you disagree with the way I say it, maybe I said it exactly the way you needed to hear it. And I wanted to circle back around and dwell on that topic for a minute. Because as we go into the election season, we're going to see more and more outright gaslighting of people saying one thing but meaning something completely else, or just flat out lying. Now, the extreme case in point is the Walker versus Warnock debate in Georgia, where Warnock went off over this convenient Democrat talking point of, well, I believe that a doctor's office is very crowded with the mother and a doctor in there, so the government should just get out. And the choice on abortion should be between the mother and her doctor, or the girl and her doctor. Herschel Walker, and he stands up and he just says, "Can I respond to that?" And he brings up they're ignoring that the child is in the room. There's a third party already in the room. They're ignoring that the father is not. And well, I don't think Herschel Walker went over this. Where is the father in this? I mean, they're equal. It took two to make this kid. Why isn't the father being represented in this office? And B, you got taxpayer money. So we're talking about taxpayer funded abortion, not privately funded abortion. So the government is still in the room. And this now turns what Warnock said in the Democrat talking point of, well, we believe it should be between a woman and her doctor, and that government should get out, into a flat out lie. It's a lie. And once you see the lie, once you hear the lie, you can't unhear the lie. And the same is with power generation. Once you understand that solar panels are toxic, you cannot look at a solar panel installation without wondering about how much ecological damage is that going to cost. How much usable land is going to be lost trying to dispose of those panels. Once you understand the ecological impact of wind turbines, that they destroy fauna and flora around them, then you begin to understand that, yes, if you have a very windy country, a wind turbine may look like a good idea, but now you're deliberately destroying both birds and plants by having that wind turbine out there. Is that really what you wanted to accomplish? And as it keeps drilling down, once you hear the other side of it, once you hear the counterpoint, you can't look at or observe the original point without realizing that there's something here that's missing. This is kind of hollow. And that is exactly the point of psychological warfare. Psychological warfare is essentially telling you something or feeding you a lie and phrasing it in such a way that even if it's objectively wrong, not subjectively wrong, objectively wrong, as in it is an absolute lie, it is an absolute falsehood, but it is said in such a way that you go, good point. I agree with that, because you aren't told the full story. There's no mention made of what's being omitted. There's no indication that something is being omitted. You're just being left out to You're being only fed a part of the story. So, learning how to deal with psychological warfare, learning how to recognize omission, can be as important as any other step in combating psychological warfare. And it's not something that's going to happen overnight. It's not something you're just going to wake up someday and go, I know how to recognize deceit. You're probably not. It takes, effectively speaking, a long time to learn how language is twisted, to learn why language is twisted. But if you start asking questions, and that's all you really need to do, you need to ask questions. For starters, what is the motivation of the person saying this? What do they stand to gain? What does a Democrat stand to gain from telling you that it's a choice between the mother and the doctor, or the woman and the doctor, explicitly leaving the mother part out? Well, by leaving the mother part out and explicitly saying woman and a doctor, they conveniently don't talk about, well, there's a baby there. That this is it took two parties to make this baby, and the father, the man, is not even being involved at all, even though it's his kid as well. He's got just as much equal right to have a say in what happens with the kid. And fair argument here, if the father wants the mother to take the term because the father is willing to pay all the costs and support the kid, then that's the father's choice. Right? He was there for the creation of the organism. He's got a say in what happens with the organism. And again, this is learning how to combat psychological warfare. What's missing? What's not being said? What are you not being told? Why would you not being told this? We come back to the point. Why do the Democrats want abortion so badly? Why do they think abortion is such a pivotal issue? Why is this an issue at all? Well, the simple answer is because it's about control. It's not necessarily about the act of abortion. It's not necessarily about the destruction of a human life. It's not necessarily about the ejection of a parasite. It's not about the injection of a symbiote. It's about power. It's about having power over other people, being able to say, we can spend your money like this because we want to. And once you can step back and realize that it's not that the issue of abortion for a Democrat is not actually about the issue of abortion, it's not about the issue of a lost life, it's not about the issue of a lost voter, it's not about the issue of a continued civilization, that it's simply an issue of who has power, who says what, who controls what. Now we have a framework to deal with where we can understand why this is such a hot button topic. The issue of abortion is not one seen as women's rights by the Democrats. It's not one seen as a right at all. It's simply an exercise in power. We can do this, so we're going to do this. We can enable this, and by enabling this, we enable our own power. So we're going to do this. Again, this is an idea. It's not an explicit action. The idea of being able to control people and then gain power from controlling people, or being able to give people something they want and gain political power from that, is ancient. And that is an important distinction to make. We're not dealing necessarily with the specifics of the event or the consequences of the event. We are dealing specifically with the ideology behind those events. Why does this matter? Why does this person believe this? And then we can also understand the foundationalist perspective, the Republican perspective, the libertarian perspective, the anarchist perspective. We can understand that the idea is there should not be that kind of control handed to a government entity. That people should not have their ability to control how their money is spent taken away from them. Now we can understand from an ideological perspective the inherent resistance to abortion from an ideological standpoint, not just from a murder bad, murder privilege bad. I mean, murder privilege is well enshrined in self-defense. Stand your ground. Somebody takes a shot at you, you drop them. Somebody attacks you, you drop them. Somebody assaults your family, you drop them. Murder privilege is well enshrined in law and allowed under specific circumstances, but almost always as a reaction. Murder privilege is almost, at least in law, never a proactive, where the person acting on the murder privilege commits the murder without provocation. Now, again, I'm using this term specifically because I'm driving the reaction. I want you to hear murder privilege, whip your head around and go, "What did you say?" Because that's the point. I'm phrasing abortion in a different term because I want you to agree with me, but I want you to loathe how I say it. Because once I say murder privilege, this completely upends every aspect of how you probably thought about or considered abortion in a practical sense. All right. And I'm kind of, I think, where I want to be in regards to this. And this is the other aspect of power and control, in that where I am in game, I'm obviously in a urban area, lots of trashed out houses, lots of junked up stuff, people literally living in squalor. All right, actually, can I get in closer for them? I mean, we've got a wrecked car, we've got tires piled up, trash strewn all over. Not a very pleasant place to be. Unless we look at this, and this is where the abortion is just absolutely huge in the real world. In the slums where people legitimately cannot afford to raise a kid. They can't afford the food. They can't afford the power. They can't afford the clothes. They can't afford a washing machine. They can't afford a refrigerator. And this is where we cycle back around to power generation is key. Electrical power generation is key. Crater the cost to generate electricity, crater the cost to run the machines, crater the cost that it takes to live, crater the cost. I mean, let's face it, once we have a nuclear reactor pretty much in every city, we can realistically have electrical vehicles using batteries, because at this point the power grid would be capable of sustaining an electrical vehicle to drive between cities. Nuclear reactor, tons of cheap power, very very ecologically friendly, carbon neutral, or if not extremely carbon footprint low, lowest carbon footprint there is. And we could realistically have people who could afford to drive their car every day and go wherever they want to. We could afford to have trucks that could carry supplies anywhere they want to. We could afford to have agroponics. That is to say, imagine one of these high rises out here. We'll pick on that one over there. Who is that? Can I? Let's zoom in, see if I can get a name on that. Oh, that's an Osaka building. Okay, imagine for a second that every one of these terraces here, take two of them. Just imagine for a second that each of these two branches is a single floor. The bottom half of the floor is a soil bed. The top half of the floor is an open area with frequency controlled LED lighting. Now, what you can do then is you can basically, if you're growing plants, you can always have the optimum level of light or lack of light for the plants to grow at the exact right frequencies that the plants need to generate or go through their photosynthetic process. And we see this in lots of home gardens where a specific light is being used to grow plants very quickly. Bring that up to scale, but have it on the scale of a skyscraper. Additionally, once you have a grass field, you could then start to move cattle, livestock, sheep, goats, whatever, and also have them in a high-rise building. Now you have a farm inside where you can grow meat in a literal inner city and now have the production facility to keep a constant, steady supply of meat growing alongside human inhabitants. Agroponics is a huge deal, but we're not really seeing any investment in agroponics from any country or state. But it is literally the way forward. If we're running out of real estate to generate crops and generate livestock outside, well, instead of going out, we go up or we go down. We dig deep into the ground. Actually, this would have been better if I was up there looking down in that giant hole, but whatever, we're down here right now. So again, agroponics, power generation, very big deals moving forward. And this would actually be our step 6 in our fight inflation. If you're working on an agroponics infrastructure, if you're working on a high rise that is a farm built inside a city, then you don't have to pay taxes. If you're a laborer, your wages don't get taxed. Again, this is setting up for whoever is working on these projects has to pay less money. They immediately get a cash benefit because they're not paying taxes because they're providing a useful infrastructure going forward. This would be incredibly useful to various farms across the United States who, once their taxes are suspended, well, now they can afford to fix equipment. Now they can afford to plant a few more crops. Now they have more crops to sell. This is a rolling ball of you bootstrap, you get the boot process going, you give people an incentive. And okay, so maybe it's a tax reprieve for 2 years, and then it's brought up when another president's in office, and then we have a conversation about, do these industries really need to be taxed at all? If you are in infrastructure energy, if you are providing power generation, if you are providing food, if you are in the food service energy, if you are in the water service energy, if you are doing any of these, should you really be taxed, or because you are providing an infrastructure, should you not be taxed? I think the argument's pretty clear there. If you're providing infrastructure services, maybe you shouldn't be taxed because you are providing a service to everyone around you. All right? And okay, this circles back around to, once we've dealt with improving our food generation, improving our power generation, now we have people out here who are living in the slums, literally living in squalor, where now they can afford to get that air conditioning fixed. Now they can afford the power to keep the house cool. Now they can afford the food to feed their kid. Now having a kid isn't a life-ending scenario. Now having a kid is, we can afford this, we can raise this kid, we can stay together. You can actually return a nuclear family in the inner city by cratering the cost that it takes to live in the energy city. And the thing is, when you're cratering costs, you're not just cratering costs for the people here, you're cratering costs for the, can I even see? There's a gas station. Let's go run over to the gas station real quickly. Oof. I was higher up than I thought. Yeah, I was a lot higher up than I thought. Yeah, let's in the mode I'm in right now, running around with a weapon out through public, probably not the best idea in the world. All right, so let's bring our power generation back around and we're at a fuel station. Oh, hey, there's an enemy who's looking at me. How much energy does it take for this fuel station to run day in and day out? How much electrical power does a gas station require? How much electrical power does a grocery store require? How much electrical power does a Food Lion, does a Publix, does a Burger King, does a McDonald's, does a Culver's, does a Whataburger? Oh, there's a restaurant right over there. Is that a restaurant? Maybe. It's either a restaurant. I think it's a pizza place. Okay, Pizza Hut, Marco's Pizza. How much electrical power do those kinds of places require day after day to keep equipment running? Well, what happens when you crater the energy cost? Let's say that a Publix costs $10,000 a day to run all the refrigerators, all the lighting, all the air conditioner, all the ovens. Now, I don't actually know that that's how much a Publix costs to run. We'll just ballpark this here, $10,000 a day to run all the energy costs. Well, what happens if the power company has nuclear deep well reactors and they can generate the amount of electricity to run a Publix grocery store, and instead of paying $10,000 a day, it only costs $2 a day. $10,000 to $2 based on energy creation. Now, do you see why energy is such a big part of inflation and a big part of the value of your dollar? Because when you buy a product, when you buy a pizza, when you buy something from a gas station, when you buy something from a local store, you're not just buying the product itself. You're not just paying the manufacturer who made the product, who bottled the product. You are also paying the shipping company who got that product to you. You are paying the store you are at to hold that product for you. And you're also paying the electrical bill to hold that product at that conditions in which it needs to be kept. This is the whole point of the MSRP, the manufacturer suggested retail price point. The manufacturer suggested retail price point is entirely to give everyone involved in the supply chain a profit. If you take part in selling this item and you sell it at this price point, then everybody along the way should make a profit. They should not lose money on selling this item. This is also where we get the difference between wholesale and retail. When you buy an item at wholesale, you're buying it straight from the vendor. You're buying it straight from the manufacturer. There's been no real storage. It's like you go in and you buy it off the pallet at a Costco or a Sam's Club. That is the big difference there. You are getting a price discount because you are not paying for the breakout packages. You're not paying for a specific item. You're just paying for a bulk item straight from the vendor. It just got shipped to a warehouse and you're buying it out of the warehouse. So again, once we come back to power, 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 not just political power, but electrical power. How is power generated? Electrical power is, we can see, generated day in, day out from power generation sources. And then it's also easy to see why, and this circles back around to psychological warfare, the Democrats only retain power, or the socialist ideology only retains power, political power, by convincing voters or convincing citizens or convincing subjects that they have a reason to rise up against whoever holds power, whoever generates power. We've been told over and over again that the oil companies are evil, that the power companies are evil. Well, if the power companies are getting taxed at a 50% tax rate and they have to pay that tax money out of, how they pay that tax money is they take the money they charge you for power, and then they turn around and that is the money that gets paid in taxes. Well, if you eliminate the taxes on the power companies, now the power companies have to charge you less, because they're not just, because right now the power company charges you for the power that you consume and the infrastructure to get that electrical power to you. Then they also have to turn around and pay a tax to the government to operate that power. So you wind up footing The power company's tax bill, it comes out of your power bill. Lower the taxes on the power company, you lower your power bill. And it's the same everywhere else. Lower the taxes, you lower the amount you pay. The more money you have to pay, the more money you have available, the more items you can buy, the more items you are going to buy, or the more things you may do. You may decide, I can take that trip to that amusement park. I can take that trip to that beach. I can afford that beach house for a week. I can go do this. I can go do that. I can see that movie. I can buy that game console. I can afford to run that television. I can afford to be comfortable all year. And then you start spending more of the money that you have, but it's still getting taxed. You're still paying taxes on that. And guess what? The amount of tax money that's incoming doesn't actually change. If anything, it may increase because now you have more people who are buying more items. They're paying more aggregate in taxes than they were when they were not buying items and paying at a higher tax rate. This is basic economics 001. This is before economics 101. And almost every single Democrat on the planet, every single socialist on the planet can't pass this course. They can't understand aggregate tax rate versus paid tax rate. And I realize I went square off of where I started out here, but this is entirely important to understand. And this is why, this is for everything you can say about Mitt Romney. He was not wrong in energy independence for America being a big deal. Being energy independent, being able to produce our own power without relying on other countries means we're not reliant on other countries. B, once we have our own energy infrastructure, we can start decreasing the cost of our energy infrastructure because we can reinvest in it. And if we invest in it on an intelligent level, more hydro reservoirs. I mean, okay, going back and looking at our skyscrapers for a second here, we'll pick on this one that's right in front of me. Imagine if this top part of the skyscraper here was just a cistern. It just held water. And this middle skyscraper here was just turbines, just generators. And this third one down here was just a block of batteries. How much electrical power could be generated by dropping the water from here to here, flushing it out the bottom, and now you have a water supply that's coming out into the city. You have turbines here that are generating electrical power. Well, okay, next question. How do you get water up there? Question. How high is that dam? How high is that building? I'm not sure I can get to the top of that building. I can get to the top of that dam. We'll see if I can see. We'll head back to the top of that dam, and we'll see if I can observe that building from the top of that dam, and whether or not, looking through the scope, if I am looking up or down. Because this is going to answer that question. Oh, bonk. Would help if I knew how to drive. Because this is, and if you're thinking about why this is obviously a game, well, this is still applicable to the real world. We're still dealing with physics. We're still dealing with water travel. Now, the Romans, the Roman Empire, had already solved this problem. They even have a specific term for it. It's called aqueduct. It's the ducting of water from a higher level source to a lower level over distance. Now, if you're kind of wondering, wait, are you suggesting that there be an aqueduct from a dam to a skyscraper across the city? Yes, I am. And if you're kind of working on your head, is that even possible? From in constructural terms, yeah, sure, it's possible. There's a couple different ways you could do it. You could either do a giant suspension bridge. You could do a huge arc. You could have triangle pylons coming up from the city and meeting at the top. All right, so now we are at the top of this reservoir. All right, I don't even have to get out of the car for you to see this. But leveling the camera so that I'm looking across the car and across the concrete, we can see that the top of that building is indeed higher than the top of this dam. But if we're siphoning water from here and sending it over to there, instead of pumping water all the way from the bottom of the ground to the top of the skyscraper, we could pump water here and just have it flow down a slope all the way to the skyscraper over there. Uh, Hang on. Okay, I gotta wrap this up. That's something I've really got to go deal with. All right, so very quickly, yes, it is architecturally and technologically possible to run an aqueduct from here to there in the real world, not just in a game, but the technology exists to do that. And again, if that's the kind of infrastructure building that we're looking at, we can solve multiple problems realistically in the real world that crater the cost of living, crater the cost of getting energy, crater the cost of getting shelter, crater the cost of building, of actually constructing, because once you take away the limitation of getting fuel and being able to provide, let's say we swap over construction vehicles to electric motors and they're powered by a nuclear power plant instead of by a coal-fired power plant. Well, now we have excess amounts of energy that can be used for the construction vehicles and be used to power the city, which brings down costs. Well, what happens when you have to pay less for an item? The value of your dollar grows. So more electrical power, more more fuel generation, more reliance on a constant, predictable fuel source. And we can use nuclear power to bootstrap into other energy sources. Yes, hydroelectric, very good for long term. There's lots of creative ways we can use hydroelectric power safely, but setting up the infrastructure for that hydroelectric power takes a lot of work, takes a lot of planning, takes a lot of forethought, construction, architecture design to get from point A to point B. Once we have step one in place, nuclear power plants, we can then build on that and then get us to a point where maybe we don't need nuclear power plants at all. Maybe there's something that we can retire because we've now made that quantum breakthrough. And that's the key point here. And this is the thing that the Democrats don't tell you, definitely don't tell you. Yes, there are potentially better energy sources, but the key here is staying alive long enough, getting the bootstrap point where we can investigate, extrapolate, look at, research those other energy sources. And that's what I got for you today. Hopefully you enjoyed, and I'll be back later. Marian Archive, and this has been Chaos Theory.